So this is all about, this plenary is building a grassroots movement. We've talked a lot about the changes that we want to see in the world, the ways that we can, have soil without oil, sequester carbon, reduce our fossil fuel consumption. But a lot of these changes are big and take actual, shifting systemic structures to accomplish, changing policy, right? These larger changes. And so that means building our collective power is critical to having success. So the speakers for this panel will each bring their unique and important views on how we can do that. How can we actually build collective power, work across lines of difference, and make a real impact on the issues that we care about. So our first speaker is Karl Anthony, co-founder of Breakthrough Communities. Karl is an architect, author, and urban suburban design strategist and co-founder of the Breakthrough Communities project. He has served as the acting director of, he has served as the acting director of Community and Resource Development Unit at the Ford Foundation, and he directed the Foundation's Sustainable Metropolitan Communities Initiative and the Regional Equity Demonstration in the United States. Karl founded the National Conversation on Regional Equity. I'm struggling to read this right now. The National Conversation on Regional Equity, or CORE, a dialogue of national policy analysts, advocates for new metropolitan racial justice strategies. He was founder and, for 12 years, executive director of the Urban Habitat Program in the San Francisco Bay Area. I had the privilege of spending time with Karl last year on the People's Climate Train, going to the People's Climate March in New York City. Yes, we had 170 activists. That also included Miguel Robles. That's where I met him. And all of these activists together on a 4-day train trip, sharing knowledge and skills all along the way, building our connections stronger, and on our way to a mass march in New York City that had 400,000 people come out from very diverse constituents. So I was honored to be there with Karl Anthony, to know him better. He's someone that I look up to as a leader and an elder of our times, really. So please give it up for Karl Anthony.
Good morning. It is a great privilege of mine to have an opportunity to talk with you for a few minutes about a topic that's dear to my heart. And I want to say, to begin with, that I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and my colleague and partner, Paloma Pavel, is going to be helping me a little bit with the slides that I have. But I want to make some introductory remarks. I'm associating myself with the remarks that were made a little bit earlier about the framework of oppression. And we've been talking about the framework of oppression in the United States since before the United States was the United States. And we are now confronted with the fact that we're going to change, we're hoping to change, we're hoping that we'll be successful in changing to a new regime in which the issues of climate justice are brought to the fore in order to make it possible for all of us to live on a planet that is both safe and has enough resources for all of us. In the next 2 decades, the majority of people in the United States will be people of color. And as we think about the challenge of moving to a new paradigm of soil, not oil, we need to be thinking about how we are communicating this message and building the collaboration between people of different racial backgrounds who have a history which is quite disparate. We went through the same events, but we had a totally different interpretation of those events. And one of those significant events began in the 15th century. First slide, please. Began in the 15th century when the origins of plantation slavery were developed. In a little island off of Africa called Madeira, the Portuguese entrepreneurs came together with their African slaves to produce the first plantation of sugar planting, which then spread from Madeira across the Atlantic Ocean to the Caribbean, to Brazil, and eventually the plantation culture came to the United States. And this culture, which for several hundred years was also an environmental issue. And it is a remarkable thing to me that after all of this time, we still have not seen or understood that slavery was an environmental issue. This is a really remarkable thing. Next, please. What we've noticed, for example, is that the slavery system was actually the origin of our system of industrial agriculture. So we make a lot of references to industrial agriculture, but if we trace it back to its beginning, it began with the enslavement of African people. And the 7.5 million people came across as slaves. So we need to think about what did that beginning do and what has it done since then. And we are now engaged in frameworks of oppression, which is now several hundred years later, and we're still dealing with the kinds of issues that we had dealt with and thought we had solved. We look in our schools and see our children are being sent off to juvenile hall for standing up and protesting many of their conditions, and we're losing a whole generation of young people. How can we build a community coalition when many of the people from our community are actually facing genocide today in our communities? And so as we think about soil, not oil, we need to really begin to understand that we have conditions that go back a long ways. Next, please. The conditions that we're facing are very much rooted in the Columbian Exchange. And the Columbian Exchange was a process by which plants, animals, and diseases were transported across the ocean to the New World from Europe and Africa. And the plants that were brought here from Africa produced the possibility of people working together and living together, and this was a positive aspect of that. But these plantations were also involved in the production of a whole series of projects, which in fact were addictive substances, starting with sugar. Now I have to say I'm a diabetic myself, so I know a little bit about the dangers of excessive sugar, molasses, rum, cocoa, coffee, and eventually tobacco. These addictive substances were part and parcel of creating the first global market. And this was 200 years before the Industrial Revolution. And in fact, it was a central part of the Industrial Revolution, and it's very rarely mentioned when we think about the sources of our current challenges. Next, please. I also want to talk about the black agrarians. You know, after the Civil War, many African Americans who were freed had hoped to really establish a strong relationship with the land. They believed in Jeffersonian democracy and believed that the way to freedom was to establish small family farms in order to have their subsistence needs met. And this was also implemented in many of our historically black colleges. The most important one probably, or one of the most important ones, was Tuskegee Institute. And we had scholars in these colleges teaching people about agriculture, teaching people about how to take care of meeting their daily needs. And these people were driven off the land by violent Ku Klux Klan and forced to come to the cities to be able to make their livelihoods work. And so now we're confronting the need to transform our experience in the cities. And we're facing a new challenge where we have to overhaul our metropolitan regions. You know, I was really deeply impressed by Vandana Shiva's conversation last night. It was a wonderful thing to hear her talk about how we needed to bring back an awareness and an understanding of our roots in the soil. And as I was listening to her, I was asking myself, how are we going to now take this experience that we had very deeply in our culture and transform it in a way that makes sense for our communities? And so as we look at our metropolitan regions, we need to ask ourselves, how can we speak not two languages? How can we speak one language? How can we speak the language of science, the language of soil regeneration, the language of restoration and reduction of our greenhouse gas emissions, and also speak the language of liberation and transformation of our culture? And so I'm here to say today that one of the biggest challenges that we face within the climate justice and environmental movement is actually to learn each other's stories and to be able to speak the language authentically from the heart. Not two languages, not 15 languages, but one language that people can understand. So I'm leaving you with this main message, which is in order to build a conversation across our metropolitan regions, we need to think and act in a way that shows that we really mean business about justice as a central part of the elements that are necessary. And we need to be able to bring that message forward, not only in the things that we're against, but also in the kinds of solutions that we're bringing forward as the kind of world that we want to live in. So I'm wanting to challenge everyone who's involved in this movement to really think about how we make the movement reflect our commitment to social and racial justice at the same time that we're building a just society that is actually liberated from this industrial agriculture that is actually the source of much of our painful realities that we're facing today. So I want to thank you very much. I want to mention that many of these details will be covered in my forthcoming book. The next slide, please. My forthcoming book, The Earth, the City, and the Hidden Narrative of Race. And we are challenged now in the next period of several years to not only meet the targets that we're really setting for climate change and climate justice, but also having justice reflected in our social movements that are moving in that direction. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Karl Anthony. He's such an inspiration to me, such a wealth of knowledge. And I feel like I could just sit down and listen to him for days and just soak up such incredible knowledge. So thank you for being here today. Our next speaker is Rose Braz, the anti-fracking campaigner at the Center for Biological Diversity. She's a colleague of mine at the center, and she coordinates the she's the campaign director for the Climate Law Institute, and coordinates the Climate Law Institute's climate campaign and communications work, as well as organizing our grassroots anti-fracking campaign. She's a graduate of UC Berkeley's Bolt Hall School of Law and has worked both in private practice and at the United Nations International Commission of Jurists in Geneva, Switzerland. Prior to coming to the center, Rose helped found and was the campaign and media director for Critical Resistance, a national grassroots organization working to end society's reliance on prisons as an answer to social problems. So please give a warm welcome to my friend and colleague, Rose Braz.
Thank you so much, Valerie, and it's really an honor to be here today. And I have to say, it's also really an honor for me to be on this particular session, both because of the other speakers on this session, and also because of the topic, which is my favorite topic, movement building. And the reason it's my favorite topic is because I really believe that we cannot win on any of these issues in any substantial ways without building a strong, broad-based, powerful grassroots movement that demands the change we are seeking. So it sounds like I'm in the right room. I wanted to ask each of you to take just a second to think of at least two movements, grassroots movements, that you feel have been powerful and successful, inspirational, movements you've been a part of, or movements you know about from history. Just think of a couple of those movements. Maybe some folks can shout out. The War of Vietnam. Anti-apartheid. I was there. Civil rights, women's. Okay, great. Lots of successful movement. We have come a long, long way. Now I want you to take just another second and think about what those movements have in common. Mobilization, us. Motivated people. Coalitions. Commitment. Energy. Teamwork, love. Someone else, I asked a friend of mine this question yesterday. She said, I'd love to. I agree. I love all of you. So absolutely. And what I want to do with my short time with you today is to really talk about some of the elements. Certainly, unfortunately, there's no algorithm or recipe we can look in a book and say, oh, this is how you make a successful movement. But I do think, hopefully from this exercise and our experiences, we know that there are things that successful, powerful movements have in common. And I want to share a few of those with you through telling you the story of our work to build a movement to stop fracking and other forms of extreme extraction nationwide, but I want to focus in a bit on our work here in California. So I think the reality is just a few years ago, if you asked most Californians, and I did ask a lot of Californians, what do you think about fracking? Either they did not know what fracking was, or if they did, they tended to think of it as something that happened in Pennsylvania and it happened for natural gas. There really was not a reality that fracking actually was occurring in California, and mainly for oil. And I think if you look at what's happening now, that really is not the case any longer. Californians know what fracking is, more and more so, and they also know the threats of fracking. And recent polls, I don't know if people are familiar with the Public Policy Institute of California polls. Well, they never even polled on fracking, and now they do, so that's a victory. And the most recent poll that they produced showed 59% of the people polled opposed expanded fracking in California. And that is a huge, huge shift change in a very short period of time, and that is really thanks to all of our collective work. And the collective work that we're doing here in California has largely for us come under a grassroots statewide coalition that we've helped to found with a lot of you in this room called Californians Against Fracking. Who's a member? All right, great. You're a member organization. Who wants to be a member? Because we're the statewide coalition to ban fracking in California. Yes, join us because we need you. That's what the movement is, right? We need all of us. So in a very short period of time, a couple of years, we've had this shift change in knowledge and awareness about fracking in California. And we've also worked to build a coalition that is now more than 200 organizations strong, organizations from across the state, big and small, environmental justice organizations, environmental organizations, faith groups, health groups, farmers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think one key thing we've learned is that what makes a movement successful, just getting back to my first question, one of the things that makes movement successful is that we're talking about values, right? We need to know a lot of the specifics, but what we really need to know and share and talk about are values. And sometimes in the environmental community, particularly, I think we fall into these traps of like this many gigatons of CO2 and that many, this effect of that thing. And it isn't that we don't need to know these things, but we move too closely to those things or rely too much on those facts instead of really appealing to values that we all share. So with fracking, for better or worse, we know that as communities we value clean air, we value clean water, we value a safe climate, we value equality. Fracking, much like many other forms of industrial pollution, it largely occurs in communities already heavily impacted by other forms of environmental injustice. And you see that with fracking for sure, because the majority of our fracking takes place in the Central Valley. And you also see that in South Central LA, where there's a lot of extraction, including extreme extraction through other forms of fracking and extreme extraction. So recently, just getting back to this issue of values, I think for fracking, it's also about like what's at stake. And those are where our values of clean air, clean water, health, etc., really are the values we're expounding here, along with the equality and talking about where these things are cited. Recently, the state commissioned its first scientific study on fracking, and there were a number of findings that took place. Among them, which I think is one of the most significant ones, is that 500,000 people in California live within 1 mile of a stimulated or fracked well. And that is unabashedly dangerous in so many ways, not to mention all of the other impacts that come from fracking. In New York, they issued a scientific study, and after much pressure, not just the scientific study, but after massive grassroots mobilization, the governor there banned fracking, which is a huge, huge victory. People dogged him everywhere he went in that state. And the scientific study on the impacts of fracking certainly helped kick it over the edge. The health commissioner there actually came out and said, I would not want my family to live near one of these sites. And thus, I have to follow that conscience and say, I don't want anyone's family to live near this. And they banned fracking. Here in California, we have this scientific study. And unfortunately, our intractable governor in the third largest oil-producing state in the country has thus far refused to act. And I don't know how many people saw yesterday's news about the governor firing regulators who were trying to actually enforce the Safe Drinking Water Act with the injection well program here in California. We'll talk a minute about injection wells, and the governor basically bypassed that. There are now more than 2,000 injection wells operating illegally in this state, and our governor is pushing that forward. And at the same time, shortly after those decisions and firing of the regulators who were trying to enforce the law, received over $700,000 in oil company donations to his tax plan back in 2011. So we're certainly up against a lot here in California. One key difference between California and New York is that we are so much of an oil-producing state, and it's something we don't think about when we think about California. We think of it as green, right? Or we like to think of it as green, and the reality is, unfortunately, is a very different picture. So the first key takeaway from this in terms of movement building is I believe you need to have a very specific, concrete, demand, ambitious goal that speaks to our values. I think that's a key part of successful movement building, and I think what we're doing, we continue to learn that in the anti-fracking world about how we talk about fracking. I want to move and shift to some of the strategies that we've used that I think have been successful in building that movement. One has been about really building what we call constituency outreach. So we've worked with communities who are already in community to speak about why fracking, actually adding fracking to your agenda is not adding fracking to your agenda. It is part of your agenda. It's part of your goals, because the kind of society, you know, we all want. You can't have the impacts and threats of fracking. So we've worked to create faith against fracking. We did some work with people and faith communities around the Pope's encyclical, and Jerry Brown going to meet with the Pope and talk about, you know, how he agrees with the Pope and climate change and keeping, we have to keep oil in the soil, and then returns to our state and just green lights, fracking and other forms of extreme extraction. We've worked with local officials against fracking. So we put together a sign-on letter that was signed by more than 100 local officials to the governor, asking him to put a halt to fracking and other forms of extreme extraction. We delivered that letter at the California Democratic Party press conference held outside the California Democratic Party's convention. And we had 3 local officials, including a representative here from Richmond, and including a 21-year-old young man from Arvin, California. Do people know where Arvin is? Central Valley, Bakersfield, heart of oil company, 21 years old, who signed this letter and came with us to that convention to deliver it. A really powerful, powerful moment. We've also worked to form Students Against Fracking and labor. We're working right now to do labor against fracking. So these constituency build-outs have been I think a very successful strategy that we still have a long way to go. You know, it's not like we know all the answers, but I think that they've been great opportunities to bring communities together with small asks in the beginning and to continue to build and toward that broad-based movement. So briefly, I also wanted to tell you a very inspiring story out of the Central Coast. Are people familiar with the county of San Benito? Is anybody here from San Benito? San Benito is a small rural county. It's on the California Central Coast. It's largely an agricultural community, pretty quiet. One day, all of a sudden, these big rigs came into town and started thumping. They described them as the thumper trucks, and no one knew what the thumper trucks were doing, until they learned that the thumper trucks were prospecting for oil that was accessible potentially through fracking and cyclic steam and other forms of extreme extraction. And a community came together there and worked with their board of supervisors. Ultimately was not able to pass a ban, but did get some regulation through the board of supervisors. But they weren't done. They understood that no amount of regulation was going to make their community safe. And they went forward and said, okay, Board of Supervisors, if you aren't going to do this, we're going to take it to the ballot box. And they did that. They were outspent 13-1 in this rural community. And I won't go into the list of propaganda lies that were put forward by certain interests in wanting to see extraction continue in San Benito County. But the punching, you know, through to the end there, they won. With 59% of the votes, after Big Oil had spent $2 million more per capita than any other California race in that community, we won. David versus Goliath. And I think the other big point of that story in terms of movement building is that the NGOs like us, the Center for Biological Diversity, and many others stepped forward and contributed to that race in a really powerful way. In other words, really supporting the community to get out in front and win this fight, and in ways that they needed and they identified needing. So another kind of key piece is I want to take away is just that giving people very specific, concrete things to do. You can organize with your local officials to pass a resolution or sign this letter or come to this press conference. You can organize with your faith community to sign this letter to the governor around his visit to the Pope. you can organize with your community to pass an initiative or an ordinance or a resolution, and we'll help you do that. We'll provide you, the support to do that. But giving people concrete, specific things to do in their communities is, I think, another key strategy that's worked very well for us in terms of building a movement against fracking. A final point I wanted to just bring to the food not fracking piece, because this is the Soil Not Oil Conference, is to make some additional remarks about the connections here. So fracking in oil and gas produces a lot of wastewater. There's a big problem about what to do with wastewater. Some of it is dumped in, and you can see the way in which agriculture and oil, we know that the center of agriculture in California is the Central Valley, and we also know that the center of oil production in California is the Central Valley. So literally you have oil production right up against agriculture. And you have the wastewater from oil production, also a huge problem, often right up against agriculture. There are a few ways in which the oil companies deal with the wastewater. One is through dumping it into unlined open-air pits, which doesn't happen other places in the country. So Green California still allows this to happen. Another way is through injection wells, which have been linked to earthquakes in places like Oklahoma, not necessarily known for their earthquakes. And then another way they're dealing with this wastewater is to selling it to water districts that are then selling it to farmers for use in irrigation. So there was a recent Mother Jones expose. I don't know, did people see that? Anybody? That talked about these two companies in particular selling their oil wastewater to the Coelho Water District in Kern County. The Coelho Water District then serves about 90 farmers in Kern. It's about 10% of Kern's county's farmland. And while the fields they're taking the water from, fracking is fairly rare on those fields, those oil fields. There is oil production going there, and fracking has occurred there. So there is a huge, huge threat, and the independent scientific study found that it is likely that wastewater from fracking is being sold to farms and being used to irrigate crops. The Mother Jones story also identified these particular vendors as buying water from the Coelho Water District, so not necessarily evidence that they've used that oil wastewater to irrigate their crops, but it does seem likely. The other thing to note that while the organic standards USDA bars petroleum-derived fertilizer, there currently is no such prohibition on water from oil wastewater from oil operations and fracking. Thus, crops that are labeled organic may have been watered with this fracking and oil production wastewater, and there are some efforts to deal with that. And then, of course, you have the huge impacts on farm workers working in these fields using this irrigation water. So Assemblyman Gatto has introduced a bill to at least label the fruit and vegetables produced with oil wastewater. So that's happening right now. We also put together a sign-on letter to Governor Brown to ban the practice and are looking for farmers. We're definitely looking and reaching out to farmers and chefs and others involved in food work to sign on to this letter. It's on our website, Californians Against Fracking. And with that, I just wanted to conclude with, how many of you got this mailer? So I know you're all familiar with SB 350, which is now pending in the legislature. The oil companies, just to also have a reality check in the movement we're building, is the links they'll go to is, I don't know how clearly you can see this, but it's labeled SB 350, the Gas Restriction Act of 2015, and it indicates that if this law passes, you're going to run out of gas, and not only you, but your little kids also are going to have to push your car home. And this went out to a number of Californians, I don't know how many across the state, to try to defeat this effort. So it is definitely big guns we're under. And with that, I think I'm going to say my takeaways, just to say that I think movement building is absolutely necessary to our wins, and pieces of movement building to think about when you're working on these issues. Do we have specific goals, ambitious goals, demands that are clear to people, that are based on values, and concrete ways, a range of ways for people and communities to get involved in the effort? And I feel like we're winning. I just feel like we haven't won quite yet. So thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Rose, for the insight, not just on figuring out where we want to go, but how we're going to get there and how we're going to win. So our next speaker is an inspiration to, well, especially young people, but people of all generations everywhere, is a leader of our times. He is only 15 years old, but he's already a distinguished leader in the environmental movement. Whoa. Is everything okay? Okay. So Xiuhtezcatl Martinez is from Boulder, Colorado. He is an environmental activist, hip-hop artist, and public speaker. He has spoken at over 100 events around the world. He is the youth director of Earth Guardians, an international youth-based environmental nonprofit that is committed to protecting the water, air, earth, and atmosphere. He became a public speaker at the early age of 6, and has spoken, all around the country and the world, including at United Nations Summit in Rio and in New York. Locally in Boulder, Colorado, he has worked on successful campaigns to get pesticides out of parks, regulate coal ash, and help achieve bans and moratoria on fracking in Colorado cities. So he's traveled across the nation and to many parts of the world, educating his generation about the state of the planet that they are inheriting and inspiring them into action to protect their future. I saw him yesterday at his workshop. He blew us away, and I'm sure he will inspire you too.
Put this one back then. That took a minute. What's up, everybody? How y'all doing today? I'm gonna say I had about like a fourth of the people that are in the room now in here yesterday, and they were about twice as energetic as you guys are. I know it's Saturday morning. Let's try this one more time. How y'all feeling today? That's a lot better. Thank you guys so much. So it's pretty reciprocal, I feel like, when you give energy, when you're up here talking, you give a lot of energy, and you're giving a lot of information, and you have your passion, and you're talking about what you love. So what's really important is when we get that back from the audience, it's really important for us so you guys let us know we're doing a good job. Unless we're not doing a good job, then you throw rotten fruit at us. So, my name is Xiuhtezcatl Martinez. I'm 15 years old. I'm an indigenous environmental eco-hip-hop artist, spokesperson for my generation, representing youth and indigenous people at United Nations forums. I kind of travel all over the place. I'm in and out of everywhere. And so I kind of came to talk to you guys today just about how the youth movement has kind of come and mobilized. I think it's a really interesting and important story that more and more people got to start paying attention to. And I feel like as a young person, I've been in this movement for the last 9 years, believe it or not, on the front lines of the climate and environmental movement. And I've seen it grow. I've seen what works. I've seen what doesn't. And it's pretty interesting to see how young people play a role in this movement. A lot of the reason that I got involved is this amazing support system that I had from my parents, my family, and my community. And I saw this documentary called The 11th Hour. I kind of grew up with a really deep sense of connection to the forest, the mountains, the rivers, the ocean, and I saw that kind of as a world that I belonged to. And then I saw The 11th Hour by Leonardo DiCaprio, his whole documentary, and I saw that kind of the world that I belonged to was collapsing due to human lifestyle. So there was that very early sense of education and passion for protecting the planet. And I was like, this is our only home. My home is being destroyed by human action. So I decided to take action upon that. And ever since then, I've kind of been on the front lines of this movement, doing everything that I can to turn things around. It was pretty devastating because when we look at the state of the planet right now, it's depressing, right? It sucks. Because we got stuff like fracking in our communities, we got tar sands. So I feel like 8 years ago when I was a kid, well, I'm still a kid kind of, but like when I was like 7 years old or whatever, like I could look at all these problems and I could be like, those are all important issues, but they're not affecting me yet, And now I got the natural gas industry knocking at my back door, trying to get into my yard, trying to drill for the minerals underneath my home, underneath my town. So I feel like every issue that we saw 8 years ago is more present today than it has ever been. Not only has the problem of climate change and environmental destruction increased all over the planet, but the severity of the issues and kind of the proximity to our lives is increasing. I was just in LA the other day, and I was driving from the airport to the hotel that I was staying at for a bunch of meetings, and I saw this huge oil field right on the side of the highway. And we pulled off into like a wildlife reserve park, and you could see the oil extraction from there. I was like, what is we're like in one of the most populated cities in the country, and there's like an oil field like as we're driving through Los Angeles. It was amazing. I was blown away by it. So I think that every issue that we saw 8 years ago has gotten worse and worse and worse. And so the increase and the need for more action to be taken has never been greater. And I think that one thing we all got to look at is that all these issues that we see before us, tar sands, environmental destruction, the disappearing of species, the toxification of our soil, our air, our water, our food, the things that we're wearing. We live in a toxic world, that all these things are getting worse and worse, are going to be left to my generation. This isn't something that's like, well, we can wait to take action in the future because it's not that. This is like some of the most urgent, pressing issues of our time. Look at any issue that we see and it's going to be left to my generation. By the time I'm all of your guys' age, every issue that we see today is also going to be tenfold increase in intensity and the frequency that we are seeing these problems affecting, especially young people in our communities. So kind of telling my story and my connection to climate change. My thing is kind of around climate change, right? Because I believe that climate change is one of the greatest issues of our time. I believe that all these issues that we're talking about, fracking, climate change, GMOs, the toxification of our soils, the acidification of our oceans, the disappearing of our rainforests, the contamination of our waters, those are all connected because they're all from the same thing of this human sickness. These are all like different symptoms of this human illness that we have, that when we look at the earth, we see a tool, we see a resource, we see something that we can take from. That's the way that we're viewing the planet, and that's what's messing it up. It's this mindset that we can take whatever we want without thinking of what is going to impact future generations to come or what is impacting the rest of the world. The whole planet is thinking very greedily in the way that we are trying to gain in the moment, in the short term, without thinking about what's going to happen for future generations. In my backyard, literally in my backyard, like my basement got flooded. You guys heard about that huge flood that happened in Colorado and Boulder? Well, that was in my hometown. These huge fires every single year for the last 5 years. We've been setting record-breaking fires, and the next year it breaks the previous year's record of the worst fires in Colorado. So we had the worst wildfires we've ever seen in our lives, and the greatest flood in Colorado history in a 3-month period of one another. That's not normal. You don't see that. And then on top of that, with all these trees that are burned down, and then it increases the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which speeds up climate change. And then the more carbon dioxide there is in the atmosphere, increase in temperatures. Increase in temperatures for Colorado means shorter winters, means lack of snowpack, means drier summers, more fires. And then in the winter, when we have shorter winters, we have more pine beetle. More pine beetles kill off more trees, more dead, dried trees for forest fires to eat. It's a never-ending cycle in my hometown in Colorado, in Boulder, where we are seeing more and more severe effects of climate change. This is like the beginning of it. This is the tip of the iceberg for us, whereas other parts of the world are suffering far more than we are. California's in a drought right now, and at the same time we're using processes of extraction like fracking that use millions of gallons of water every time that they horizontally frack. We're not only running out of water here in California, we're using up what little water we have left, we're contaminating what water we have left, and we're just selling it back to the farmers so that they can irrigate the crops with toxified water. It's an incorrect system, and we're trying to solve it with the same problems that got us here in the first place, and it's not working. Obviously, it's not working. Well, So, oh, so. Y'all know what you guys know what the problems are. You guys know about the problems. You know about the destruction, about the devastation. I don't need to tell you any of this, right? Maybe I can remind you from my perspective that it's not like, oh, my children are gonna. It's like that's me, that's me. My future, my planet that I'm gonna be passing on to my children. That is what's at stake, yo. You gotta see this. From my point of view, that my children, that my generation, we're going to suffer from these effects far more than you guys will, And I think that means that this generation has to be on the front lines of the movement. So now I'm going to talk about what's good and what is working and what needs to happen to flip all this around. So what? For the last 20 years of the environmental movement, we've kind of been doing the same thing. We've trying to do the same thing, and how has that worked out for us? Not very great, huh? Okay, so I look into this crowd and I see a lot of people that are not younger than 25. And I see not a lot of diversity. So we're kind of building ourselves into a movement where the people that care about climate change, the people that care about the environment are, generally not people of color, generally not young people. And there's a segregation that happens when we talk about this issue that kind of closes people off. When people see these issues, when people talk about the environment, you're an activist, you're an environmentalist, you're a hippie, you're a tree, whatever, right? And we got to break down all these barriers because I'm not even doing this just to protect the environment. It's about human lives. People don't understand that. These issues in my backyard, fracking, that affects human lives more than anything, right? And so that's what it's about. So we have to bring new, fresh, creative ideas to the table in order to be able to address these problems. My generation needs to be included not only in are we going to be most affected by these issues, but we got to be included in the solutions. We got to be here in this room, in these conversations. We need people of color here. We need all people here. It doesn't matter who we are, where we are from, the color of our skin. We all got to be in on this conversation because we're all going to be affected by our climate and environmental crisis that we see on the planet right now. We got to start looking at this issue differently. We got to start looking at the solutions differently and tackling this problem in a way that we've never even seen before. So one way that I'm doing that is through hip-hop, through music. So, all right, I'm going to do this for fun. How many of you guys listen to hip-hop? Put your hands in the sky if you listen to hip-hop music. I don't blame you if you don't, because a lot of hip-hop on the radio is garbage. So kind of what I've tried to do over the last couple of years is use the tool of hip-hop, which a lot of young people my age listen to. So obviously, a lot of you guys do too. I'm proud of you. Are listening to as well, is using this tool of music, of movement, and putting a positive message to it so that people will listen to what we have to say. Not only are we interesting people, but we're educating them, inspiring them, and sharing a positive message, sharing them and showing them that in order to take action on these issues, you don't have to be an activist. You be whatever you want to be, whether it's a skateboarder or an artist or a poet or a cinematographer or a photographer. Use that to change the world. Don't change yourself to be an activist so that you can change the world. Use what you got to change the world. That is where it has to start, That's what this movement is going to be about. So I'm going to show you a quick video that we just produced. I was just in the Black Hills of South Dakota for the Unity concert, performing with a bunch of other amazing artists over there, sharing our message, trying to return the Black Hills to the Lakota Sioux Nation, which is rightfully theirs, some of the most sacred land of indigenous peoples in this country. And we filmed this incredible music video to a song called Indigenous Roots, and the message behind the song is that we are all indigenous to this earth. Doesn't matter where we are from, doesn't matter what our ancestry is, doesn't matter the color of our skin, we are all indigenous to this earth. We all drink the same water, we all breathe the same air, we are all of the same land. And so here we go, check this out. This is another way that we are using film, music, hip-hop movement to kind of change the game.
Still don't understand. We fight for the people, for the planet we stand. As a government and industries walk hand in hand, we will fight for our rights against the tyrants. We will take back our streets. This is our land. This is the only home we got. We must protect it, not neglect it. Say no to the pipeline, counting on Obama to reject it. An ancient lost wisdom still lingers in this land. We desecrate our sacred homes for the toxins. The ancient people of this earth, they will bring forth the world's rebirth and show the companies and industries what our planet is worth. My people tell me stories of when this land was once free. Is this our woven fate, or can we create our own destiny? We have stolen this land from future generations. Separation, desperation, yeah, that's right, we are First Nations.
La batalla que luchamos para el hombre humano, la tierra y el viento, la agua contaminados. Somos guardianes de la cultura de nuestros ancestros. Xiuhtezcatl su cama para la vida me ha dado. Es una cosa sobrevivir y otra cosa crecer. Como una flor en el bosque, es tiempo amanecer. Somos gente de la tierra, no la gente de la guerra. El camino rojo es nuestra cultura sagrada.
An ancient lost wisdom still lingers in this land. We desecrate our sacred homes for the toxins. The ancient people of this earth, they will bring forth our world's rebirth and show the companies and industries what our planet is worth. My people tell me stories of when this land was once free. Is this our woven fate, or can we create our own destiny? We have stolen this land from future generations. Separation, desperation, yeah, that's right, we are First Nations.
Yeah, that's why we are First Nations.
The indigenous people were the first people to roam the land. Though our way of life has been threatened, we are striving to pass on our teachings to the next generation so that they may create a new world for all people on earth. We are the caretakers of the earth. We honor the sacred connection between all beings. We saw beauty in the simplest gifts of nature. We are a part of the earth, not separate from it. We are the warriors of the land, the protectors of nature, and the guardians of the earth. I'm a descendant of a people oppressed and enslaved. Our people are rising up, breaking free from these locks and chains. We are bringing forth a movement that's on the rise, uniting the people of the earth all under one sky. To defend our sacred land, to defend our only home, to protect these sacred waters. We will never be alone. Reconnect to the sacred wisdom of our ancestors past. Set free our people, we are rising at last. To defend our sacred land, to defend our only home, to protect these sacred waters. We will never be alone. Reconnect to the sacred wisdom of our ancestors past. Set free my people, we are rising at last.
An ancient lost wisdom still lingers in this land. We desecrate our sacred homes for the toxins. The ancient people of this earth, they will bring forth the world's rebirth and show the companies and industries what our planet is worth. My people tell me stories of when this land was once free. Is this our woven fate, or can we create our own destiny? We have stolen this land from future generations. Separation, desperation, yeah, that's right, we're First Nations.
Indigenous Roots. Thank you so much. So I had a few more slides, but I'm running out of time. So I'm just gonna close with one final statement. And first of all, shout out to everybody who's in the room today, who's been here the last couple of days, because this is where it starts. You come here, you get inspiration, you talk to other like-minded people, you educate yourselves about the problems in your community, you learn about how to get involved with Californians against fracking, you learn how to get involved with all these campaigns. And so huge shout out to Miguel for putting all this, put your hands together for Miguel for making all this happen. Yeah, he's really busted his butt to get us out here and to make this movement happen. So huge shout out to him. And I just wanted to say as kind of a final thing that it starts here. It just starts here, you know, and it can't stop. This movement, this seed that we are planting right here, right now in the minds of every person in this audience can be cultivated. We have to continue from here on out. Every single day we have the opportunity. Every decision that we make is a vote for or against my future. So I'm asking you to make that conscious decision for our future. You know, when you ask yourself why we fight, why we're here, why take time out of your lives to do this, look into the eyes of someone that you love, of a child that you love. And remember that that's why we fight, that that's why we are here, that's why we struggle, that's why we stand, that's why we build this movement, is for the future generations. We all are leaders. We need every person here to take action and be able to collaborate and connect with this movement. We all have a part to play, we really do. So it's time to start playing our parts, and from this moment on, build this movement out in whatever way that you can, contribute in whatever way that you can. So it starts here, but that doesn't mean it has to stop here. Thank you guys all so much for your time. We got albums with all of our music on it. If you guys want to check us out, I'm probably going to be performing at other points in time here. So stick around. Thank you guys for being here. Have a wonderful day.